me just a minute. You're going to see what part we're working on today. I'll end up showing you what I'm listening to in a minute. Chords tangled. It's the fun thing about having a bunch of chords is everything gets tangled. I kind of finished her hand this morning. Her nails, those are cute. The only thing I did finish off the ring. It's not as red as I thought it would be. That's okay. That's not the part we're working on. So I saw, because I'm open for suggestions on how to do this. But some suggestions where people said to start here, by the legs, and then work the way up to this part. And then there's a bunch of people just saying do random sections, which I'm doing already. I'm going to start in the legs and the socks here so I get those out of the way. Because there's I don't know if you can see it. Like a confetti spot, somewhat color blocking here. She's got a bunch of different colors in her skin. But anyway, this is where we're starting. And this is what we're listening to. It's a podcast on Audible. It's called Between Worlds, Scary Stories Told in the Dark. But we're not in the dark, so. All right.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Gyrie, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable. Settle in. Turn off the lights.
No.
If you dare.
I would.
Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
What? You sleep? Crazy.
Good evening. You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome, dear listeners, to Season 16, Episode 16, Between Worlds. I'm your host, Otis Gyrie, and here with me tonight, as always, is my nocturnal neighbor, Malcolm Blackwood. Nocturnal, eh? I suppose that makes sense, Otis.
I've never listened to this one before. Let's be completely honest. But that's real loud.
How are you tonight?
Okay, so we're going to start at the leg area.
Between the realms of reality and
For those of you just joining.
Malcolm, how about you? Just sharpening my
Gotta
sense
find
of
those colors.
curiosity and my knife collection. You can never be too prepared when it comes to cutlery, you know. Tonight's theme
Why did I start
sounds
using the...
intriguing.
Oh, that's right.
And so it should.
They stick when I try to get them out.
Places, both literal and figurative, where the familiar twists into the unknown. Hear tales of endless walks, sinister objects, alternate realities, and unseen terrors hiding in plain sight. Sounds like your weekend itinerary, Otis. Let's get started before I cut too deep. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, featuring the first 3 chilling tales. But did you know that for just $7.99 a month, or less, with an annual membership, you can unlock even more?
They were going to tell the story.
Nothing quite like supporting horror and getting twice the fright for your efforts.
I don't have any thoughts on people.
Absolutely.
People will be
And
who they
now
want
let's
to be.
dive into tonight's first tale. Our first first
Just
story
how I see
tonight
it.
from Kitty
Doesn't
Olsen.
bother me in any way, shape, or
Invites
form.
us
It's
on
not
a
my
journey
life.
like no other. What starts out as a simple stroll becomes something far more sinister, as endless fields and shifting seasons lead a lone wanderer down paths that defy logic and time itself. Where do these paths lead? And what might they be escaping or heading toward? Without further ado, I present to you I Took a Walk for 7 Years. It was August 9th, 2010. I was 38 years old.
But
My
nice
oldest
username, by the
daughter,
way.
Avis, was 12, and the younger pair, my twins, Joanne and John, were 9. I'd been married for 15 years. I worked at an insurance firm. And every Sunday, while my wife and Avis went to church and the twins went to my mother's house, I took a walk. It was a clockwork sort of an arrangement. My wife knew never to push me into going with her. I was an atheist and set on staying that way. Of course, given what happened, my views have changed. It was just a typical day. Avis gave me a kiss on the cheek and told me not to forget my coat, even if it was an abnormally warm day. I'd say it was about 65, maybe 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
You need a coat for 68
I
degrees?
started down my walk. We lived off the beaten path, so to speak. Our road was never busy, and most of the area was occupied by farmland. A truck passed me on the road, and I waved. I was pretty sure it was my neighbor Art, although it could have been one of his sons on his way to church. Anyway, he waved back. I took a turn to the right on Hetzel. Hetzel was a dirt road, but it was never traveled except by farmers, and today it was quiet. A good time to collect my thoughts. Every other time before this, I'd turn back around once I'd reached Art's farmhouse, although occasionally his wife would pull me in for lemonade and gossip. But August 9th would be the day I took the longest walk of my life. I was passing by the cornfield when I heard laughter. More specifically, it was a child's laughter. I paused and looked into the cornfield. Her forest green eyes looked back at me. The girl looked to be no older than 7, had red hair tied into twin braids, and I assumed she was one of Art's grandchildren. She smiled broadly. "Catch me," she squealed. She darted back into the corn, and I could hear her giggle slowly fade away. Usually I would have scoffed at going into the field, as I'd have to cross the ditch and I didn't want to get dirt in my pants. But I felt a little bit of concern, a small child running around the field by herself. So, with a jump that I knew my knees would feel in the morning, I leaped into the cornfield. Using the sound of her laughter, I started pushing through the corn. The dry leaves scratched at my face and hands, and dust kicked up into my face. I knew she couldn't outrun me for long, even if she was a child with boundless energy. I had longer legs. However, I exited the cornfield in a place I didn't know. My house was nowhere to be seen. A light layer of snow covered the ground. I spun around, but the corn was gone, replaced by frosted evergreen trees. The temperature had significantly dropped, and I was thankful that my daughter had insisted that I bring a coat. I shivered and spun around a few more
See, I
times.
thought this entire time it was his wife that told him to grab the coat.
Where was that little girl? "Hey, mister," a voice called from behind me. I finally spun around enough to see her peering past the branch, and she grinned. "If you catch me," she said, "I'll show you the way out." That began the chase.
Don't bargain with
Getting
children.
smacked with
Hello.
tree branches was far worse than the corn. The needles tearing at my skin like knives as I pushed past them to find that little girl. Whenever I got lost, I'd hear her laugh. She was having fun. I was not. The wet snow between my feet made it impossible to gain traction. Forget running. I'd slip if I so much as stepped wrong. With every minute I got colder and colder, and my teeth shattered so hard my jaw ached. Then I broke from the tree line into a grassy meadow. I didn't expect the change, so I ended up toppling over. The grass smelled as sweet as honey. A fat bumblebee trundled past my head and landed on a black-eyed Susan. It was heaven. But the meadow's peace shattered with the sound of the girl's laughter. "Oh, are you giving up already?" she chided me. The warm sunlight made her glow like a tiny angel, but as I stumbled to my feet, I caught something behind those big eyes I hadn't before. Malevolence. She was toying with me. I can't tell you how many times the environment changed. One minute I'd be across a meadow, then a desert during a sandstorm. In places like that, I had to navigate entirely by sound. Sometimes we'd be back in the cornfield, and I'd shout for Art to get me out of here, but no help ever came. Sometimes we'd be running across barren tundra, where she'd be just out of my grasp. She wasn't always a little girl. Sometimes she was a young teen with a gap between her teeth who'd hum sweet tunes. Sometimes she was a ravishing model of her early 20s, with fiery hair and a flirtatious grin. And at times that she wasn't any of those, she was an ancient crone with a bent back and arthritic hands that clutched her cane.
You sure it's a
Still
kid
managed
at
to
all?
hobble away from me. She called herself Clarice occasionally. Other times it was Lolita, Dixie, Isabella, or Hope.
My lord.
I lost count of her names too. The straight answer was impossible. She'd never lie to me though. She'd just avoid answering any of my questions. That's how I knew she was my key out of there. I finally caught up to her in the meadow. This time she was a little girl again, and her taunting was beyond cruel. She'd stop, pick bouquets, and dart away before I could grab her. She tossed flowers about and sing ridiculous nonsense songs. I knew I could never win like this. I dropped to the ground and the little girl stopped. "Oh, are you really giving up now? You're so close." I gave no reply. I remained still as I gasped for breath. I heard her get closer and closer. "Mister, are you okay? Do you need a break?" she asked. We've been going on for a really long time. Once I saw her shadow, I lunged. She almost got away, but my hand wrapped around her braid and I pulled her back so hard I could have snapped her neck. I embraced her in my arms and victoriously breathed out, "I got you." I never felt so successful in my entire life. I'd finally done it. She turned around and frowned. "Can we play again? We were having fun," she begged. "You don't have to go back. We can stay here." No way. I was done with the games. "No, you let me out of here right now," I said, "or I'm strangling you with your own braids."
Damn.
It was a little dramatic, perhaps, but I gripped her hair tightly to make it clear I was serious. She sighed before she kissed my cheek, the same way Avis would before church. "Okay," she replied. When I woke up, I was lying in the middle of a cornfield, a familiar cornfield. It was springtime and the water was freezing cold. I peeled myself off the freshly plowed ground, recently churned to mud, and staggered to my feet. I had one goal in mind: home. I could finally go home. As I stumbled toward my destination, I noticed how truly tired I was. I was as parched as the deserts I'd run through, and my body was stiff, aching as if I had run 1,000 miles. For all I knew, I may have just done that. After tripping in the mud a dozen times, I finally caught sight of my house and burst into tears. Barely able to move, I headed for the backyard. My wife should be home about now. Surely she'd see me and come to my aid. Two teenage boys were on the back porch. One was smoking while the other was playing on his phone. I recognized neither of them. Had my family moved? I raised my hand and attempted to speak, but it came out as a raspy moan. The boys both jumped out of their skin. The one smoking dropped a cigarette and backed off. The shorter one raised a hand. Sir, you're gonna have to. He trailed off in his eyes. The eyes that looked exactly like my wife's widened. Dad? He cried. I lost consciousness just a few steps from the back door. I woke up in the hospital. I'd been cleaned up and had an IV running in my arm. Sitting beside my bed, I saw a young woman fast asleep. She had a tattoo of a bird on her neck, a sparrow to be exact. Avis always loved sparrows. I'd been gone for a little over 7 years. When I hadn't returned from my walk, my wife reported me missing.
Holy cow.
At first, law enforcement assumed I'd just run off with another woman. But when that line of investigation went dry, they suspected I'd been a victim of foul play. Search parties were formed and people were questioned. A few were detained, but no arrests were made, and no one was convicted. They never found me. Life marched on. Art apparently died about a year after I went missing from a stroke. His sons inherited the family farm, then sold it to another family, a family oblivious to the fact that their property was the place I'd been spotted. The boys on the back porch were in fact my boys. I just hadn't been around when Joanne, at age 13, announced that they now identified as James. I wish I could have been there to help him become a man. I apparently had a good replacement, though. 4 years later, after it looked like I was gone for good, my wife met Clark.
Oh my.
6 months after they met, they were married. Clark was a real outdoorsman, enjoys fishing and hunting, and loves to go camping. As I chased the fairy child through her playground, he was taking James and John out on trips every weekend and putting away money to help James afford his surgeries and related expenses. Clark had 2 kids of his own, and before long, I was little more than a memory in my own former home. They could survive without me. Avis was the only one who hadn't given up on me. She pursued every lead, every dead end. If there was so much as a slight of a chance I could be found, she chased it. She was such a stubborn girl, my girl. But even she had grown up since I'd been gone, from a girl to a woman, and it was like talking to a stranger. One who had my chin and nose, but a stranger nonetheless. My wife did what she could to help me adjust and kindly offered me a guest bedroom while I recovered. I looked like I'd been through hell, broken bones and healed, muscles torn and strained beyond their limits. I was malnourished, could barely stand without a walker, and had nowhere to go. It was clear, however, that I couldn't stay there, not anymore. Clark's kids looked at me like I was some boogeyman who lived down the hall. He and I tried to be polite to one another, but tension mounted as my wife struggled to decide who she would officially divorce. She chose to end our marriage. Just like that, I was a stranger in my own home and no longer welcome. I was only in the way. I'd lost just about everything, but not everything. The little girl wasn't gone. To be honest, I don't think she ever left. Nightly, I'd see her outside my window, peering in with those big eyes as she mouthed the words, "Come with me." I've told everyone I'm just going out for a walk.
Damn.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds?
This is a commercial.
There's no field manual for finding the
Oh.
right home, but when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
Crime Door TV is now a podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Schofield. Join us as we dive deeper into the world of true crime and go one-on-one with legal analysts.
That
Oh.
squat for 7 years.
Be some factual evidence.
And performed by yours suspecting individual.
There we go.
Its arrival, as unremarkable as it is puzzling. But this isn't just any bag. It seems to have a mind of its own. One that doesn't take kindly to mistreatment. What happens when something as ordinary as a tote bag turns into something extraordinary and terrifying? Sit back, relax, and allow me to regale you with the story of the Green Toad.
Interesting.
Part 1. Michael adjusted the rearview mirror for the third time in 2 minutes, watching his 8-year-old son Aiden fiddling with a worn strap on his tattered blue tote bag. The bag, stitched by his ex-wife Hannah years ago, was barely holding together. The seams were loose, and the once vivid fabric was now faded and fraying at the edges. Aiden had loved the bag since he was a toddler, but it was no longer doing its job. Michael sighed as Aiden continued pulling at the loose threads. "Hey, buddy," he said, forcing a smile. "What do you think about getting a new bag today? Something with a little more room for your things." Aiden looked up, his expression a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Like a backpack?" "Not exactly, something better." Michael glanced at the passenger seat, where a lime green tote bag sat, neatly folded. He had stumbled across it earlier in the day while browsing the curiosity shop for a birthday gift for a friend. The shop had been cluttered with oddities, cracked porcelain dolls, antique jewelry, and strange trinkets that seemed to belong to another century.
Yeah,
Among
that's
the
definitely where we
chaos,
buy
the
stuff.
tote bag had stood out, its color vibrant and its zippers gleaming like new. He thought it odd that such a mundane item was for sale in such an unexpected place. It certainly seemed out of place amongst the antique oddities and assorted supernatural bric-a-brac on display. And if he was being honest, the bag, despite its ordinary nature, seemed the strangest of all, positioned on the shelf betwixt the smattering of ornate relics and allegedly mystical artifacts. Yet he couldn't deny that it was exactly what Aiden needed, and the price was right. Who was he to complain? It was sturdy, had compartments galore, and most importantly, it was in Aiden's favorite color. Michael had bought it without hesitation, though a nagging voice in the back of his mind had warned him that Hannah might not approve. "Close your eyes," Michael said as he reached for the bag. Aiden obeyed, grinning.
Finally,
What is it?
relax.
"You'll see." Michael
Where
placed
did
the
it
tote
go?
on Aiden's lap. "Okay, open them."
Sorry, I'm in the way.
Michael ran his hands along the inside seams, feeling for any tears or hidden pockets, but there was nothing unusual.
I need to find the putty, but I found the actual
He
wax.
was watching
I
it
guess
with wide,
that's
anxious eyes.
gonna have to work.
"There's nothing wrong with it," Michael said finally. "No holes, no loose stitches. It's just empty." Aiden's lower lip quivered. "It's not fair, Dad. I really liked those things. My blanket, my drawings." Michael's chest tightened. "I know, buddy. I'm sorry. We'll figure it out, okay?" Aiden nodded, but the sadness lingered in his expression. The next day, Michael took Aiden out for ice cream and a trip to the toy store, hoping to lift his spirits. They picked out a new plush dinosaur and a fresh pack of colored pencils, which Aiden carefully placed into the tote bag. For a while, things seemed normal again. Aiden's laughter filled the car as they headed home, and Michael felt a small sense of relief. But as they pulled into the driveway, Aiden unzipped the bag to check on his new items, and froze. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling. Michael turned in his seat. "What's wrong?" "They're gone," Aiden whispered, holding the empty bag open for Michael to see. Michael's stomach dropped. He grabbed the bag, rifling through it with mounting urgency. But Aiden was right. The pencils, the dinosaur, everything was gone. Michael's hands began to shake. "You're sure you put them in here?" "Yes," Aiden cried. "I put them in right after we bought them. I didn't take them out, I promise." Michael stared at the bag, his mind racing. This wasn't possible. Part 3. Michael couldn't stop staring at the empty lime green tote bag. The fabric looked untouched, the zippers gleaming as if the bag had never been used. But the items Aiden had put inside, his blanket, his toys, and now the brand new pencils and plush dinosaur, were all gone. Maybe they fell out in the car, Michael said, his voice edged with desperation. Aiden shook his head vehemently. I didn't open it, Dad, I swear. I believe you, Michael said quickly. He got out of the car and searched the back seat, checking under the seats and in the cracks between the cushions. Nothing. He felt like he was losing his mind. He even looked in the trunk, though he knew it was pointless. When he returned to Aiden, who was still sitting motionless in the car, the boy's face was pale and his lower lip quivered. It's not your fault, buddy, Michael said, crouching down to Aiden's level. We'll figure this out, okay? Okay, Aiden mumbled, but the tremor in his voice made Michael's stomach churn. That night, after Aiden had gone to bed, Michael spread the tote bag out on the kitchen table. He flipped it inside out, inspecting every inch of the fabric. There were no holes, no secret compartments, nothing to explain the disappearance of Aiden's belongings. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the bag, half expecting to see something, a clue, a tear in space, anything. But the light revealed only the same clean, empty interior. Michael sat back, running a hand over his face. He couldn't explain it. And worse, he didn't know how to comfort Aiden when the boy asked him why his things kept vanishing. The weekend passed slowly. Michael tried to distract Aiden with games and movies, but the boy seemed subdued. He kept the tote bag close, though he didn't put anything new in it. When Sunday evening came, Michael drove Aiden back to Hannah's house. He was still dreading telling her what had happened with the bag, knowing she'd find a way to blame him. Hannah opened the door as they arrived, her arms crossed and her expression already sour. You are late, she snapped. Michael checked his watch. It was 8:03. 3 minutes, Hannah. She ignored him, turning her attention to Aiden. Did you have fun with your dad? Aiden nodded silently, clutching the tote bag as he shuffled inside. Hannah glanced at the bag, her eyes narrowing. Still using that thing? Yes, Mom, Aiden said quietly. Michael braced himself for a lecture, but Hannah didn't start in right away. Instead, she sighed and motioned for Aiden to go upstairs. I'll be up in a minute, she said. Once Aiden was out of earshot, Hannah turned back to Michael. So, what's the deal with the bag? Michael hesitated. He loves it. He also said all his stuff disappeared out of it, Hannah said, her voice sharp. Do you know how upset he's been? He thinks he's to blame. Michael felt a flicker of anger. It's not his fault, and I've been trying to figure it out. There's nothing wrong with the bag. It's not torn or broken. I don't know what's happening. Hannah's eyes narrowed. You mean to tell me his things just vanished into thin air? Michael met her glare. I'm telling you, I don't have an explanation. Maybe something happened at school. Maybe someone's messing with him. I don't know. Hannah crossed her arms. You don't know, or you don't care. The words hit harder than they should have. You think I'd let this happen if I could stop it? He snapped. I think you're too busy trying to play the hero to notice when things go wrong, Hannah shot back. Michael bit back a retort. This wasn't helping. Look, I'll keep looking into it, okay? We'll sort this out. Hannah didn't look convinced. Fine. But if this keeps happening, that bag is going in the trash. I don't care how much he loves it. The next morning, Hannah decided to use the tote bag herself. She needed something sturdy to carry a few family heirlooms, her mother's antique jewelry box, a porcelain vase, and a small album of old photographs, to her parents' house. She packed the items carefully, zipping each compartment securely. The bag's size and organization made it perfect for the job, and though she hated to admit it, the lime green fabric didn't look half bad against her coat. Hannah left the bag in her car while she exchanged Aiden with Michael at their usual drop-off spot. She noticed the way Michael glanced at the bag, but ignored it, feeling a small surge of petty satisfaction. By the time she arrived at her parents' house, though, the satisfaction had soured. She opened the car door to grab the bag and froze. It was light. Too light. Her hands trembled as she unzipped it and peered inside. The bag was empty. No, she whispered, frantically checking all the compartments. Nothing. The jewelry box, the vase, the photo album. They were all gone. She stared at the bag in disbelief. Hannah stormed back into the house, the tote bag clutched tightly in her hands. She dialed Michael's number, her anger boiling over the moment he answered. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded. Michael's voice was calm, if confused. "Hannah, what are you talking about?" "My heirlooms," she snapped. "The things I put in your stupid bag. They're gone." "What?" "Hannah, I didn't..." "Don't you lie to me," she interrupted. "You've been messing with this bag all weekend, haven't you? What did you do to it?" "I didn't do anything," Michael said firmly. "Hannah, calm down and think. Where were you when you last saw them?" "They were in this bag," she yelled, "and now they're gone. I swear to God, Michael, if you..." "Hannah," Michael said sharply, cutting her off. "You know me. You know I wouldn't touch your things. Think for a second. Did anything else happen?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Hannah spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less furious. "This isn't over." She hung up before Michael could respond. Part 4. That evening, Hannah sat at her kitchen table, glaring at the lime green tote bag. It sat innocuously on the chair across from her, its vibrant color almost mocking her. She had checked the car and the driveway, and even retraced her steps back to the exchange point with Michael. There was no sign of the heirlooms. She reached for a glass of wine and took a long sip. "You're just a bag," she muttered under her breath, as if saying it out loud might dispel the irrational dread that had taken root in her mind. Hannah decided to get rid of it. She grabbed the tote and stormed out to the trash bin, tossing it inside, as promised, with a satisfying clang, where it landed atop a pile of molding, discarded leftovers. The lid slammed shut, and she marched triumphantly back into the house, brushing her hands off as though she'd just completed a chore. That night, she slept soundly, until she awoke at 3 a.m. to a damp, musty smell and a strange, sticky sensation under her body. Groggily, she reached over to turn on the bedside lamp. Her breath caught in her throat. The lime green tote was lying beside her on the bed, its fabric stained with what appeared to be marinara. The sheets were ruined, soaked through with the dark red sauce. She scrambled out of bed. "What the hell?" she whispered, quickly backing away. In the kitchen, Hannah stared at the tote, now sitting in her sink. She had scrubbed it clean, but its presence unsettled her. "Fine," she muttered. "You want to play games? Let's see how tough you are." She reached for the scissors in her junk drawer and began cutting into the bag, or at least, she tried to. The first snip barely left a scratch on the fabric. Frowning, she pressed harder, her hand trembling with the effort. Unexpectedly, the scissors snapped, the broken blade clattering to the floor. Hannah let out a frustrated scream and tossed the ruined scissors aside. She stormed back to her bedroom, leaving the bag in the sink.
Trying to find the
The
letter.
next evening, Michael
But I
arrived
mean-
at Hannah's house to drop Aiden off as usual. He knocked, then waited. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The porch light was on, but the house was silent. Michael hesitated, then tried the
Wrong
doorknob.
one. Not the one I
It
wanted.
turned
But
easily in his hand.
letter anyway.
"Hannah?" he called out, stepping inside. The house smelled faintly of wine and something far worse. Something rotten.
Oh gosh.
Michael's stomach churned as he followed the smell to the bedroom. He pushed the door open and froze. Hannah was lying on the bed, her headless body gruesomely mutilated. Her limbs had been cut with what looked like excruciating precision, leaving her torso a bloody mess. Garbage, rotting leftovers, and soiled food was strewn across the bed, coating her in filth. Beside her, the lime green tote sat upright and pristine, as if it had been placed there deliberately. Michael staggered back, his hand covering his mouth to stifle a scream. He leaned against the doorframe, trying to catch his breath. He had to leave, now. As Michael turned to go, a sound stopped him, a soft creak from behind. He spun around, half expecting to see Hannah's body moving. But it was just the tote bag, swaying slightly as if caressed by an unseen breeze. Michael's mind raced. He couldn't call the police. They'd never believe him. His fingerprints were already all over the house, and the bitter custody battle with Hannah would make him an obvious suspect. His eyes darted to the tote. A horrifying thought occurred to him. Slowly, he approached the bag. He grabbed one of Hannah's severed arms, gagging as he stuffed it into the tote.
I knew it.
The bag swallowed it whole, the blood vanishing as though it had never existed. Shaking, he grabbed another piece, then another. The bag consumed everything. Limbs, soiled sheets, even the bloody kitchen shears he found on the floor. When the last piece was inside, Michael zipped the bag shut. He waited, staring at it. Seconds passed. When he opened it again, the bag was empty, clean. But Hannah's head was nowhere to be found. Michael paced the house, searching frantically. The head had to be here. He checked the closet,
This
under the
head
bed,
was already in the
and even
bag.
the bathroom. Nothing. Damn it, he hissed. Dad? A small voice called from the hallway. Michael froze. Aiden. Quickly, he shut the bedroom door and stepped into the hall, forcing a smile. Hey, buddy, what are you doing up? Aiden rubbed his eyes sleepily. I heard something. Is Mom okay? Michael swallowed hard. She's fine. She's just resting. Why don't we head back to my place for tonight? We can have an extra movie night. Aiden blinked up at him. Really? Mom said no more extra nights. Well, Michael said, his voice faltering, she changed her mind, just for tonight. Aiden's face lit up, and Michael felt a pang of guilt. Can I say goodbye to her? She's not feeling well, Michael said quickly. Let's not wake her, okay? Aiden hesitated, but then nodded. Okay, Dad. Michael ushered him toward the door, grabbing the lime green tote on the way out. Back at his house, Michael sat on the couch, frantically considering every variable. The bag was clean. The evidence was gone. Except for Hannah's head. He had no idea where it could be, and that made him very nervous. He glanced at Aiden, who was asleep on the couch beside him, clutching a new plush toy. Michael closed his eyes, trying to block out the image of his ex-wife's dismembered corpse and the feeling of her blood on his hands. Somehow, he had to keep Aiden safe. Part 5. Michael awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway and sat up on the couch. For a split second, he thought it might be Hannah, but the reality came crashing back. She was gone, her mangled body reduced to nothing more than a terrible memory and a missing head. He glanced at Aiden, who was still sound asleep, clutching his latest replacement plush toy. Michael stood, careful not to wake him, and crept toward the hallway. The footsteps had stopped, but a faint rustling sound came from the direction of his home office. As he approached, he noticed something on the floor just outside the door. It was the lime green tote lying on its side. The bag's zipper was partially open, and several of Aiden's belongings, the same ones that had mysteriously disappeared, were scattered across the floor. Michael froze. His hands trembled as he crouched down, picking up Aiden's sketchbook and the familiar plush dinosaur. Both were spotless, as though they had never been lost at all. "What the hell?" he whispered, staring at the bag. Michael placed the items on the kitchen table and began pacing. The bag had previously consumed everything he put inside it. Aiden's belongings, Hannah's remains, even the bloody sheets. How was it possible that these items were now back, pristine and untouched? He ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spiraling. Was the bag reversing its effects? If Aiden's things were returning, what else might come back? Michael's stomach churned as the answer hit him. Hannah. Later that afternoon, Michael made a decision. He would return to the curiosity shop where he purchased the bag. There was no other choice. "I'll be back soon, buddy," he told Aiden, who was sprawled on the couch watching cartoons. "Where are you going?" Aiden asked, his eyes drifting to the green tote, now sitting upright in the hallway. "Just running an errand," Michael said quickly. "I'll be back before dinner." Aiden nodded, his attention already shifting back to the TV. Michael grabbed the tote, zipped it shut, and headed out the door. The curiosity shop was just as cluttered as Michael remembered. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and the shelves were crammed with strange, mismatched objects. The shop owner, an older woman with sharp eyes and a knowing smile, was standing behind the counter. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "Back already?" she said, her voice cool and abused. Michael placed the tote on the counter, his hands trembling. "I need answers. What is this thing?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "It's a bag." "Don't play games with me," Michael snapped, his voice rising. "You knew what this thing was capable of when you sold it to me." The woman's smile didn't waver. "You bought it, didn't you? No one forced you." Michael clenched his fists. "This tote, it makes things disappear, and now they're coming back. All of them." The woman tilted her head as though considering his words. "Interesting," she murmured. "It doesn't usually do that." "What the hell does that mean?" Michael demanded. She gestured for him to follow. "Come with me. I want to show you something." The back room of the shop was even more unsettling than the front. The walls were lined with shelves, and on them sat dozens of severed heads. Michael's stomach turned, and he staggered back, nearly tripping over a pile of old books. The heads varied in appearance, some fresh, others decayed, and a few so old they looked mummified. But all of them stared blankly forward, their lifeless eyes fixed in eternal horror. "You'll find this one familiar," the woman said, gesturing toward the far end of the shelf. Michael's eyes followed her hand, and his breath caught in his throat. Hannah's head sat among the others, her features frozen in a twisted mask of pain and fury. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, no, no." The shop owner watched him with a detached curiosity. "The bag always brings the heads here. I don't know why. It's just how it works." Michael turned to her, his face pale. "You knew this would happen. You sold me this thing knowing what it would do." She shrugged. "When something like that bag comes into your life, you don't tell it no. It demands sacrifices. I'm just a facilitator." "You're insane," Michael said, his voice trembling
I
with
cannot
rage.
find that
The woman's
symbol.
smile faded. "Call me whatever you want, but you should worry less about me and more about what's waiting for you at home." Michael froze. "What do you mean?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked back to the front of the shop, leaving Michael alone with the heads. Michael drove home in a daze, the tote bag sitting in the passenger seat. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel as he replayed the woman's words in his mind. When he pulled into the driveway, his heart sank. A police car was parked outside his house. 2 officers stood in his living room, their faces grim. received a tip from Hannah's family, one of them explained. They're concerned. She hasn't been answering her phone. Michael's pulse quickened as he set the bag down on the hallway bench. I haven't seen her since I dropped Aiden off. The officer's eyes drifted to the tote. Mind if we look around? Michael's throat tightened. Of course not. He lied, the words barely escaping his dry mouth. As the officers began their search, Michael's mind raced. He had cleaned everything. The bag was empty. There was no way they'd find anything incriminating. But then, as if defying the very laws of reality, the lime green tote bag tipped over on its own. It began with a low, guttural squelch, like wet fabric being wrung out. Michael's stomach lurched as a dark, viscous liquid began to seep from the open zipper. Before he could react, the bag convulsed and spilled its contents onto the floor in a grotesque cascade. Out came Hannah's severed remains. Her limbs tumbled out first, the clean cuts glistening under the room's dim light. Michael's breath caught in his throat as her torso followed, landing with a sickening thud and splattering blood across the hardwood. The room filled with the stench of decay and coppery blood. One of the officers staggered back, cursing under his breath. The other wasted no time. Get on the ground, now! Michael staggered back, his legs buckling. No, he cried. No, this isn't possible. The officers didn't hesitate. One pinned Michael's arms behind his back, while the other radioed for backup. You're under arrest for the murder of Hannah Wallace, the other said coldly, his voice barely masking his revulsion. Part 6. Michael sat in the stark interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the metal table. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the lime green tote bag resting on the table across from him. Despite the blood-soaked horrors that it contained just hours ago, the bag now looked immaculate, its zippers gleaming innocently. The door opened, and Detective Alvarez stepped in, her expression unreadable. She sat across from Michael, folding her hands neatly in front of her. You're in a lot of trouble, Mr. Wallace, she began, her tone measured. Do you want to explain how your ex-wife's dismembered body ended up in your possession? Michael's mouth felt dry. What could he possibly say? That the cursed tote bag had swallowed the evidence, only to regurgitate it at the worst possible moment? I didn't kill her, he said finally, his voice hoarse. I know how it looks, but I didn't do it. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. So how do you explain the remains? Michael's gaze flickered to the bag. It's the bag, he muttered, knowing how ridiculous it sounded. Alvarez frowned. The bag. It takes things, Michael said desperately, and then it brings them back. For a moment, Alvarez just stared at him. Then she leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. You expect me to believe that? It's the truth, Michael's voice rose, frantic. We put things in the bag, and they disappear. I don't know how it works, but I swear to God, I didn't kill Hannah. Alvarez's expression hardened. You're not making this any easier on yourself, Mr. Wallace. The trial came swiftly, and the evidence against Michael was overwhelming. The tote bag, along with Hannah's remains, was presented as the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The clean cuts on her limbs matched the kitchen shears found in Michael's home, and his prior custody battle with Hannah painted a clear motive for the jury. Michael's attorney tried to argue that there was no direct proof of murder, but it was a losing battle. The bag's alleged properties were dismissed as irrelevant, and Michael's claims about its curse were chalked up to a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, seemingly oblivious to the fact the bag had been used to transport human remains, but was somehow spotless, before delivering their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Michael swooned. As the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, Michael barely heard the words. His mind was numb, consumed by thoughts of the bag and its curse. Months passed. Michael adjusted, as best he could, to life behind bars. He kept to himself, avoiding the other inmates and spending most of his time replaying the events that had led him there. Meanwhile, the lime green tote sat in the evidence locker at the local police department, sealed in a plastic container. One night, as Officer Riley prepared to incinerate the evidence from the Wallace case, he noticed the bag among the items. He frowned. It didn't look like something that belonged in a murder investigation. It was too ordinary, too clean. Curious, he unzipped the bag. It was empty. Shrugging, Riley placed it in the incinerator with the rest of the items and turned on the machine. He didn't see the faint glow emanating from the bag before the flames consumed it. But the next morning, Riley returned to the evidence room to find the tote bag sitting on the shelf where he had first found it, looking as pristine as ever. Confused, but unwilling to question it further, Riley decided to dispose of the bag quietly. He took it to a thrift store out of town and dropped it off anonymously, relieved to be rid of it. A year later, the bag turned up again, this time at a local estate sale. It was sold along with other household items, eventually finding its way to an auction. By some twist of fate, one of the bidders was a distant relative of Michael, who, unaware of the bag's dark history, bought it as part of a lot of unclaimed storage items. The relative, uninterested in the old bag, added it to a box of Michael's remaining belongings that had been kept in the attic of his former home. Years later, Aidan, now in his mid-20s, sat in the attic of his childhood home, sorting through boxes of old belongings. His father's things had been sold at auction after Michael's conviction, but a few items had been left behind in storage. As Aidan rifled through the boxes, he spotted a flash of green. Pulling the tote bag out, he felt a pang of nostalgia. He had loved this bag as a child, despite the strange things that had happened with it. Thankfully, he had been spared the grisly details of his mother's death and the exact nature of his father's involvement. Smiling faintly, he decided to keep it and later gifted it to his daughter, Ashley. On her 8th birthday, Aidan presented the lime green tote bag to her, wrapping it in colorful paper with a bow on top. Her eyes lit up as she tore off the wrapping. "It's so cool," she exclaimed. "Thanks, Dad." Aidan grinned. "You can use it for sleepovers. It's got lots of pockets and it's really sturdy." That night, Ashley packed the bag with a handful of toys and took it to her best friend Scarlett's house for a sleepover. When she arrived, she unzipped the bag, only to find it completely empty. As she searched for the missing items, Scarlett's orange tabby cat wandered into the room, sniffing curiously at the spacious open bag. The girls giggled as the cat pawed at the zippers and climbed inside and left the feline to have its way with the tote, using it like a makeshift scratching post as they headed outdoors to enjoy the sunshine. When they returned from playing outside, the cat was gone. The following morning, Aidan picked his daughter up early. Ashley was upset about her missing toys and Scarlett about her missing cat. Aidan assured her it was just a misunderstanding, that he was certain both her toys and the cat would show up again soon. As they drove home, a loud thump came from the back of the vehicle, as if on cue. When they arrived, Aidan opened the trunk to find the tote bag overturned. His daughter's previously missing toys were scattered across the trunk floor, covered in something dark and sticky. Beside them, the cat's headless body lay crumpled, its fur matted and torn. Aidan stared in horror, screamed, and gagged. Ashley got out of the vehicle and approached her father, but he had the sense to shield her from the worst of it and led her into the house where he called the police. Meanwhile, back at the curiosity shop, the owner walked into her storeroom. She scanned the shelves of severed heads, stopping when her eyes landed on something new and unexpected. The head of an orange tabby cat. She sighed. Really, she muttered. Getting desperate, are we? That was The Green Tote, written by Chilling Tales for Dark Knight's creator, Craig Groshek, and performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale, you can find more of Craig and his work at our read-along horror fiction website, creepypastastories.com. Otis, any odd objects ever turn up on your doorstep?
None that I didn't return promptly to sender. But tell me, Malcolm, what would you do with a bag like that?
Leave it alone, Otis. Some mysteries are best unsolved. I should know. But speaking of mysteries, let's see what lies ahead.
If you enjoy spine-chilling stories, don't forget to check out my new podcast, Nightmare Fuel, every Wednesday. I'll share terrifying tales around a crackling campfire.
And where can they find this treasure trove of terror, Otis?
Well, glad you asked, Malcolm. Nightmare Fuels are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the Chilling Tales for Dark Knight's YouTube channel. So grab a seat by the fire and join me for tales that will keep you up at night.
No, it's not gonna
Sounds
fit
like
you.
the perfect midweek scare. Now, back to tonight's stories.
As your tale tonight comes to us from the esteemed D.D. Wickman, perhaps better known online as Saturday.
Think
And it transports us to a birthday party unlike any other.
turn it off. I'm gonna leave this here. I got the lights down. Oh, I ripped it. That's okay. Anyway, now I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.